Yes, dear friends, thank you very much for this really warm welcome here. I am happy to be here with you in Gillamoos for the first time today. I would like to extend my warmest greetings to you all from the entire party leadership of the entire Federal Executive Board, from my dear colleague Alice Weidel, who was here with you 2 years ago. She can still remember it well. So, many greetings, and yes, I am really proud and also a little touched by how many people are here today, and that shows that we are going to change the country. Dear friends, we are going to make it blue, also in Bavaria. And I have to smile a little. On the way here I briefly read the press reports and there was actually Tino Chrupalla in Gillamoos today. Does he have a sense of humor? Dear friends, firstly, anyone who knows me knows very well whether I have a sense of humor, and secondly, I come from the GDR. Yes, and many of you here too. I have heard that before. Yes, and I said 5 years ago that the Federal Republic of Germany will eventually realize that there is slowly nothing left to laugh about. And we can see that there is slowly nothing left to laugh about. You can hardly tell the difference between cabinet and cabaret anymore. And if you don't just look at your top comedian Soder here in Bavaria, we have the second one in Berlin. Friedrich Merz is now in the polls. Yes, as a citizen of the DD I can say that popularity ratings are better than Erich Honecker had better, dear friends. And what could be the reason for that? What could be the reason for that? The federal government has now been in office for over 100 days, and if it had announced its policies as an election program, which you unfortunately did not do before the election, the CDU and SPD, you would now be well below 5%. That would be certain. Friedrich Merz is a real breaker as chancellor. Not because people have to break if he wants to take away their welfare state and hold them responsible for his failures. Merz is a breaker because he has broken every election promise. Dear friends, the debt break is first non-negotiable, then special debts in the trillions. No electricity tax cut, no tax reform, nothing. And if you had to compare Friedrich Merz to a football player, who would you choose? I would choose Nick Waldmate, 2 meters tall, worth millions, poor finish, and nobody in Bavaria wants him anymore. But dear friends, not even a national player deserves this comparison. They are also overpaid, but at least they have been practicing their craft or footwork for years and they give everything for their colors. Friedrich Merz was not a politician for 12 years, but a lobbyist for BlackRock and the Atlantic Bridge. How is this man, dear friends, supposed to do politics for the people if he only knows millionaires? And you can see it in us, in our party. First they wanted to exclude us and now they want to eradicate us. But not with us, not with the citizens, not with the citizens of Bavaria and Germany. We will turn this country upside down. That is our claim. Dear friends, we as the alternative for Germany are the party for every man. We make politics for the ordinary people on the street, for all of us who mean well for Germany. And we are proud of that, and you can be proud in this country without being reported. Dear friends, we are reclaiming this pride. And if you look at the reporting, you will often see, Germany is doing so well. This is usually said by people who are much better off than the average German. And the facts, let's look at the facts, they speak for themselves. Almost a third of senior citizens are at risk of poverty in old age, and those who are not poor do not have much either. After 45 years of comparable work, a German receives a pension of 1,500 euros. An Austrian, by comparison, receives a pension of 2,600 euros. The average pension is less than 900 euros in Germany, over 1,400 euros in Italy and France. The countries in the south, which we still support with our money from the EU, dear friends. And not even 1 in 2 owns a house or apartment. The home ownership rate in Germany is now below 50%. In Hungary, by the way, almost everyone owns their own home or house and has a roof over their head. And this low home ownership rate also increases the risk of poverty. Pensions are now being eaten up by inflation. A pension of €1,500 is just about enough today, but in 20 years it will be worth nothing, dear friends, because the European Central Bank has to print more and more money so that it doesn't let the southern states of the EU go bankrupt. And the truth that Chancellor Mars simply doesn't see is that 15 million employees do not earn enough for a pension above the basic security. The personal contribution to nursing homes is now just under €3,000 per month, but only 20,000 pensioners in Germany, that is 0.2% of the 16.4 million pensioners in Germany, have a pension of more than €3,000. And we must never forget, dear friends, that sooner or later we will all be pensioners. In any case, that is our goal, and how good a society is and how wealthy a society is can also be seen by how it treats its elderly. And that is why we, as the Alternative for Germany, say that anyone who has worked in this country for 40 or 45 years should not be allowed to look for returnable bottles. They must be able to live comfortably on their pension. And that is what we will work towards. That is and will continue to be our goal, and we are sorry to pensioners. Dear friends, we want to abolish property tax and the acquisition tax on real estate for personal use. By the way, we say that double taxation of pensions is an absolute disgrace. What is being done to pensioners here? We reject double taxation of pensions and it must be abolished. Dear friends, pensioners have paid enough taxes in their lives, and we must finally do something for our future. As Katrina Bennersteiner said, families must pay €20,000 in pension contributions for newborn children and receive them back without reducing their pension entitlements. In this way, we are strengthening the most beautiful welcoming culture that there is, namely having children of our own. And when you look at the birth rate in this country, it is a disgrace for Germany, for an industrial nation, what we are doing here in Germany. We finally need children in this country again. We finally need a country that is child-friendly again. And we also need a pension insurance scheme and, above all, pension contributors, including politicians in the German Bundestag. They should be role models and they should also pay into this pension insurance scheme, just like the civil servants do, so that we finally get these pension contributors back in a fair way. Yes, what did Friedrich Mars announce before the election, dear friends? But in the meantime, he is no longer an asset manager, he is now an insolvency delayer. He is delaying the insolvency of the traffic light coalition. With the old Bundestag, he took on special debts amounting to trillions. This money benefits his buddies in the American arms industry, but not the German citizens. And today we are told that it is still not enough. We have a huge gap in the national budget and that is why we are not seeing any positive effects. Production is falling. The overall output of the economy continues to decline. The number of bankruptcies among companies and the self-employed rose by a whopping 19% last month compared to the previous year. Germany has long been in recession, but for years the federal government has also embellished these figures. Subsidies were treated as genuine added value. Debt as growth. Our party political competitors are now confusing redistribution with added value. And that is also because they have never created value, dear friends, but have always held out their hand from the circle hall to the lecture hall to the plenary hall. This must stop, dear friends. We need doers in the German Bundestag, in the Bavarian state parliament, in the local parliaments. They know what work means. The Alternative for Germany party wants to enable real added value. Employers and employees alike must therefore be relieved and, above all, we finally need real relief. We also do not differentiate between those who give work to others and those who take work away from workers and employees. The worker is doing well when the entrepreneur is doing well. The entrepreneur makes a profit when his employees do a good job. We are not a party that divides, but a party that brings people together. Our guiding principle is German interests, dear friends. This must always be the focus of every politician in their business. German interests for our country, for our citizens. And let's take a look at the current federal budget. Of course, our budget managers have used the summer break to work hard, and we have drawn up a budget that complies with the debt break and not only promises relief but also implements it, which also allows us to save money. We do not have a revenue problem. In fact, dear friends, we mainly have a spending problem in this country. And that is why we are clearly saying that we are putting an end to this climate warning that is driving us underground. We are demanding the abolition of the CO2 price. This would immediately relieve the burden on small and medium-sized businesses, skilled craftsmen, and also the citizens. That amounts to 15.4 billion. Abolition of CO2 emissions trading, abolition of the gas storage levy, reduction of the truck toll, reduction of the income tax, complete abolition of the solidarity surcharge, and reduction of the electricity tax to the EU minimum, dear friends. And additional federal funds for social insurance, pension insurance savings can also be made there, dear friends. That would be possible if savings were actually implemented, and that would include, for example, stopping the supply of weapons to Ukraine, which amounts to 9 billion per year. Stop that. Savings through the reform of the citizens' income of 14.6 billion euros. It cannot be that the citizens' income has now become migrant money, that it no longer goes to citizens who have never paid a penny into it. What kind of welfare state is that? There is no such thing in any country in the world, dear friends. Yes, dear friends, and of course what we absolutely need is an industry that can live again, an industry that can breathe. I used it from the CO2 tax, which is what we also want, and I think that is extremely important for Europe. We want to live together peacefully with all European countries in Europe, and Russia is also part of Europe. Let's finally stop allowing the public media to continue to drive this warmongering forward. And let's look at the sanctions, the Russia sanctions. The 18th package has now been passed in Brussels. The truth is, German citizens have suffered the most from the Russia sanctions. 18 sanctions packages. Chancellor Mars is calling Russia's president a war criminal and burning bridges to the east. It is a shame that a German chancellor has not yet seen fit to call Putin or talk to him since he took office. Dialogue is the most important thing, and it spreads peace in Europe. That is what we need, dear friends. And let's see what is happening. We have also experienced that in the Bundestag. Zelensky is touring the continent in olive green and collecting billions for weapons. He became famous in Ukraine as a comedian who plays the piano with a body part whose name I can't pronounce. Before 10 p.m. there is constant speculation about possible real estate holdings by Zelensky abroad. The Panama Papers, who cares about all that anymore? Which country are we actually pouring money into? Every year, currently 45 billion euros so far, and that's why we won't let anyone tell us that we have no more money. Dear friends, as long as we keep pumping billions into this corrupt country, there will be enough money, but that money belongs to the German taxpayer. It has to stay in Germany, and we all know, because we can get information elsewhere, that we are not stupid citizens and stupid henchmen. In Ukraine, people are dying for the interests of powerful men. It's about fertile soil. It's about raw materials, sea access, and spheres of influence. And it's not primarily about German interests there. And when Mr. Klingenmeil and Mr. Mer claim that our freedom is being protected in Ukraine, then we can know that that's a lie. We were told this in Afghanistan. Remember, 59 Bundeswehr soldiers died in Afghanistan. For what, I wonder? And they also started talking about Ukraine, the discussion, you know it, there was a discussion about helmets, then it was about defensive missiles. In the meantime, we are talking about ground troops, and we have repeatedly announced it and said that it will happen and that it must be prevented at all costs. We do not want a war with Russia, dear friends. And I say this as a socialized Aussie. It was always very clear to us that war should never again start on German soil. And I believe that this sentence also applies to the entire Federal Republic. That is what we fought for, and that is what I will continue to fight for as long as I have been in politics, dear friends. Because one thing is clear, all of us here, as we stand here, young and old, we really do not know what war really means. Perhaps for the very old who still know. Let's leave it at that, dear friends. We do not want to know what that means. And Germany has lost 2 world wars. Germany will not win the 3rd one either. That must be clear to all of us, dear friends. And that is why I see so many young people here, and especially the younger generation, to whom I am making my appeal now, because it is important. We need a generation of young people who are committed to peace and who do not take for granted how to continue a war, as the European heads of state and government want to do. Because what does peace mean? Peace is work, it is dialogue. Peace can only be achieved through daily work. This is a craft product in politics, and it is also something that we have to fight for every day. And as I said, we all do not really know what war means, dear friends. But one thing must be clear to us. We will not let our children and grandchildren be sacrificed for this senseless war. Never again war in Europe. We must do everything we can to achieve peace with Russia. And one more point to the younger generation, because we all hear a lot about the amount of debt that is being incurred every day. We will have incurred 2 billion euros in new debt by the year 2020. That's an unimaginable amount. We can hardly imagine what that actually means. We are currently paying 30 billion euros in interest per year. At the current interest rate, with this record debt of 850 billion, we would be paying 60 billion euros in interest per year by 2020, which won't be long. That's 15% of all income. That shows you in which direction this ship is heading. And then, under this government, young people will be told to please do military service, especially for this government. Yes, we as the AfD also support military service, but not military service. I say that quite openly, and that's why I have to think about whether this young generation even wants to go to war for this government. And as a bonus, these young people will be allowed to work until they are 70. What are we actually doing to our generation, our future generation? And that's why we need to resist this misguided policy. And one more point about Europe, Ursula von der Leyen, the bankruptcy administrator of Europe. Yes, we all know that she is good with money. She takes it empty-handed and spends it generously, because she knows many people in need. Nothing is left lying around on the street. Dear friends, after affairs and millions for consultants, she was no longer tenable as a federal minister. And when a federal minister is no longer tenable, you go to New York or Brussels. That is actually common practice in German politics. And then she was lured away to the EU Commission. There she squandered billions on the BIOS vaccine and vaccine deals. All we hear from the chief commissioner and the CDU all day long are warlike statements against Russia, as if there were no other problems in the EU. And recently it was also said that she flew to Bulgaria by plane and that the JPS went on strike when she landed, and of course it was the Russians again. It is always the Russians when something happens. Dear friends, when it comes to these people, starting with Ursula von der Leyen, one really has to ask oneself what these people are doing in the EU. They were not elected, nor were they nominated as top candidates. There is only one thing I can say: we have to vote these politicians out. We don't want them anymore. They should go. They are bringing this country, they are bringing down this EU. And one more thing, which I have now made for the 10th time in 10 years, we can do it. Yes, unfortunately I have to say that this chancellor also comes from the East. I should really apologize for that now, because normally quality always comes from the East, But what she has really done to this country is that we will probably need a few more generations to work through this again. Dear friends, the mood has changed, and if you simply rewind and look at what was still possible in Germany, in Bavaria, 10 years ago, you could still walk down the streets in the cities as a woman without having to be afraid. Today, people are criticized for this and labeled it as scaremongering, and it is said to be nothing more than a feeling of insecurity, but we can all see how the cities, communities, and localities have changed, and we can all see that we simply cannot do it, and we will not succeed, especially with this type of so-called integration, and that is why we need to turn back the clock a little bit here. We want normality again, and as the AfD, we will fight for normality, and we will rigorously deport those who have no business being in this country. Criminals must leave, and those who do not have the right to remain here must leave. And that is why it will take decades to come to terms with these consequential damages. And even an AfD government, which will be in place if I am in Saxony next year, will be at the federal level by 2029 at the latest, and we will fight for that, dear friends, because of course we need this change here. And the parties, the old parties, know that. That's why the rhetoric keeps going on, that's why they're banning parties because they can't get us back. They wanted to challenge us politically, and I still ask myself to this day when they'll finally start challenging us politically because they know that the citizens want to hear our content. We have content and also Wenning's proposed solutions that will change this country. Dear friends, we will fight for this and we will fight for it until the very end, as long as we as the AfD exist. And perhaps a few sentences at the end that really surprised me. Last week, the Tagesschau, or I think the Huge Journal, broadcast an interesting sentence, a subordinate clause after the federal cabinet meeting, when it was announced that Friedrich Merz was now meeting with his fellow ministers. As a trained master painter, you naturally always ask yourself what the artist actually wants to tell us with this. Well, we probably don't have any other problems, but Friedrich Merz is now meeting with you. You know, dear people, during the last days on the Titanic, the last hours on the Titanic, they were also addressed informally, and you know the result, dear friends. And that's why let's fight. We will get this ship back on track. Let's set sail for our Germany, for our Bavaria. Let's fight for our German language, for our German guiding culture. Let's fight for sovereignty. Let's fight for peace. In this spirit, I wish you all the best and cheers.